Hi, I'm Alicia.
And I'm Robin, and you're listening to Bowel Moments,
the podcast sharing real talk about the realities of IBD. Served on the rocks.
This week, we talked to Amalia Karlin. Amalia is a registered dietitian. She also lived with symptoms very similar to ulcerative colitis for a very long time, but never got a diagnosis. Eventually, her symptoms got to be so severe that she had her colon removed and now lives with an ostomy. Because of that, she decided to specialize in working with people living with ostomies and how they can improve their symptoms with a dietitian. We talked to her about all things ostomy, including parenting and pregnancy, and so much more. Cheers!
Hi, everybody. Welcome to Bowel Moments. This is Robin.
Hey guys, this is Alicia, and we are absolutely delighted to be joined by Amalia Karlin. Amalia, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
We are so excited to hear your story, but we're going to start out with the very unprofessional question of what are you drinking?
So I've got 2 drinks with me tonight. The very first, because my kids are already in bed and my husband is on toddler duty for the one that will inevitably come out of bed 15 times, is leftover champagne from a bottle I opened earlier to use in a recipe. That doesn't happen often, but because I don't drink very often, the other drink that I have is my electrolytes because I can't have one without the other.
Fantastic. I love that you put your electrolytes in a wine glass as well, though. So it's fancy.
Perfect. That's right.
Robin, what about you?
I am drinking the champagne of sparkling water, Pellegrino, but I muddled some fresh strawberries and put a splash of orange juice in it.
Oh, that sounds very nice. I like that.
Mm-hmm.
I am drinking, it's called a hurricane, but I don't think it's a traditional recipe for a hurricane.
I call BS.
That's what the back of the bottle said, Robin. Mm-hmm. So Phil bought me a bottle of passion fruit syrup, and on the back of it was a recipe for it. So it was I know, right? I was like, all right. So it's rum, passion fruit, grenadine, lemon juice.
I mean,
the recipe.
Fine, sure.
So
no,
and I put it in a fancy glass. So now
it's pretty.
It's very pretty, but yes. So that's what I'm drinking.
Cheers.
Cheers, guys.
Cheers.
Amalia, next question for you. Tell us your IBD story. What brings you into our community?
So I have a permanent ileostomy after having debilitating GI symptoms for about 7 years with no diagnosis, actually. And after 7 years, I met with a colorectal surgeon who said, I'm going to make a temporary ileostomy, and it's going to be used as a diagnostic tool to kind of determine what's going on and if it gives you any relief. And at that point, after 7 years of experiencing all the GI symptoms, rectal bleeding and multiple bowel movements and the fissures and the fistulas and the prolapse and everything that I'd been going through, I didn't care if this guy said he wanted to hang me by my toes from the ceiling. Give me an ostomy, sure. What is that? So he did. He gave me a temporary ileostomy, and I woke up for the first time after all those years without pain. But I still remember it was about 4 weeks after getting my ostomy, I started developing symptoms of what's called diversion colitis or diverting colitis. I've heard it both ways. And this is basically an iatrogenic form of IBD, meaning it's, as a result of a medical intervention. So it's not under the same umbrella as typical inflammatory bowel disease, but it is a form of inflammatory bowel that causes very similar symptoms to ulcerative colitis. And that's really my personal connection to inflammatory bowel. And professionally, I am a registered dietitian, and I work exclusively with the ostomy population, individuals with ileostomies and colostomies. And a majority of them have their ostomies as a result of having either Crohn's or colitis. So that's my other connection to IBD.
That is wild that this is what they came up with. So how did they explain it? So exactly, is the diverting colitis a result of the ostomy? Tell me more about this. I'm sorry.
Sure. So the name explains exactly it. Because you are diverted, because you're no longer using the remaining large intestine and rectum, basically the cells in your colon, your colonocytes, kind of get pissed off. And they're like, why aren't you feeding me? Where is the food? It's going out through your ostomy bag. Your large intestine needs fiber in order to make short chain fatty acids, essentially, which is what feeds the colonocytes. And when it doesn't have that, it becomes inflamed and you develop insane mucus and bleeding. And I essentially had an ostomy, dealing with all the implications of what it means to live with a temporary ileostomy. And I was living with a condition similar to that of ulcerative colitis, living on the toilet again, passing excessive mucus and blood. I actually developed it and then became spontaneously pregnant. So I couldn't do much about it at that time. But that was a really kind of insane time to be dealing with diversion colitis, because the treatment for it is essentially trying to feed the colon through enemas. And when you're pregnant, that can be very difficult to do through a stoma specifically. But it's basically to feed it essential fatty acids, which was basically impossible. But it is essentially what led me to having a total proctocolectomy and getting rid of my large intestine and getting rid of my rectum, and resulting in what a lot of people call a Barbie butt.
Seriously, that is the most insane thing I've heard.
Yeah. I'm just basically, I'm speechless over here. I'm just like, this is just wild to me. Let's just do a temporary ostomy to see what's going on. And then
chaos, just chaos.
Chaos ensues is basically what happened to your insides.
But also, I'm so sorry that you had to like deal with both of it at the same time.
Yes.
And then a pregnancy on top of all of it too. Like, let's just throw that in there too. What? Wow.
Yeah. You know what's the reason I really want to highlight this topic? A lot of people who get temporary ileostomies don't talk about diversion colitis. I would probably say that half of them just think it's their IBD, although I don't find as many people get a temporary ostomy if they're at that end in their journey of IBD. They generally will go pretty shortly after for a J pouch or a colectomy. But for the rest of the population who gets an ostomy, temporary, and they get this diversion colitis, they don't really understand what it is. And a lot of people don't even bring it up to their providers. It's really talked about on forums and support groups, things like that. Like, hey, are you passing mucus? Are you passing blood? Are you passing these weird, it's like kind of, I'm not going to describe it here to keep it pleasant, but people don't talk about it, and it's not well studied, and there isn't a lot of research on how to treat it. So it's kind of one of these topics that's up in the air. Already having an ostomy is one of those topics. So this on top of it, with no well-defined, treatment protocol, is not going to get a lot of attention. And the reason I think I am so passionate about it in a way of bringing awareness to it is because I went through a pregnancy. Before I wasn't pregnant. Then I went through a pregnancy with it. And then I was nursing with it. And throughout that whole time, the development of the divergent colitis really progressed into different stages and got worse and worse as a result of all the hormonal changes I was going through. And I found that to be so interesting. And I share this with other women who I chat with about, their temporary ileostomy. And I say, I don't know, I might be 1 in a million who went through all of this. But if I'm 1 in a million or 1 in a billion, someone else is out there too who's going to experience this same thing. And it turns out a lot more people are experiencing it and saying, yeah, me too, and just not really talking about it.
Robin, did this come up at all as some sort of like, hey, look out for this when you were going through your surgery?
No, It wasn't. I mean, not at all. And the first time around when I got my temporary ostomy 20 years ago, my temporary ileostomy, my colon was removed, but I still had my rectum, and I did pass a lot of mucus, even with just my rectum. So, I mean, hearing you say that, I had a lot of urgency to go to the bathroom. I passed a lot of mucus. Like, I just thought that was like, this is my lot in life now. But also, it wasn't as bad as it was before. Like, I think I've said this on the show before about other things. Like, it wasn't as bad as it was before, so I must be okay. Like, I think that we all do that. As long as it doesn't get back to the worst that you've been, you're okay.
Yeah, your baseline changes.
And so even 23 years in, I'm still like, well, it's not as bad as it was. I'm better about it now. I'm much better about it now, because I would never want anybody else that I'm talking to. I wouldn't want anybody on the show. I wouldn't want my grown daughters. I wouldn't want you. I wouldn't want anybody to do that. So I'm trying to be better about it myself, but I still catch myself in that loop of it's not as bad as it was. But I can't imagine I'm even trying to think of how I was after I was pregnant, before I officially got diagnosed, and what I was passing, like the mucus I was passing, the blood I was passing. It did change at postpartum. And I thought that was because of being pregnant. Like, I thought that was all part of what happened to your body after you were pregnant, not knowing that.
Like your first pregnancy?
Yes, which is probably what
Yeah.
triggered my IBD in the first place.
I think that the diversion colitis acts similarly to, even though it's not an immune mediated condition like ulcerative colitis, with pregnancy and hormonal shifts. I think it acts similarly in that for some people, pregnancy might put them into remission. For some people, it might make it worse, which is what happened to me when I got pregnant. It got worse, but obviously they will not touch you when you are pregnant. They won't even touch you with an ostomy. I mean, my surgeon was like, I don't want to see you. Goodbye. Go to the the hospital, because they didn't even have, obstetrics in their office. But to your same point, I will never forget with my first son, when I had this, you're a first time parent. I gave birth naturally with my first, and you come prepared with those diapers, right? You read these lists online that say, come with a diaper, and you don't even know why they tell you that, because you're a first time parent. And my husband was sleeping in the little bed next to me, and I was literally holding my newborn son night one, standing up in that diaper, thankfully. And it was coming out of the other end. So much mucus, it was leaking all over me, and I did not know what to do. And I just stood there with my baby in my arms. And I will never forget that, because as soon as I gave birth, whatever the hormones are doing made those symptoms just take off. And that's actually how I lived for 3 months postpartum. I remember nursing him on the toilet. That was like that urgent all the time. And in those diapers, I just stayed in the diapers, which, like, I really resonate with what you said about that threshold. As long as it's better than it was still better for me than it had been prior to my ostomy, even though I was now dealing with it coming out of two ends. So I just was like, okay. And my son was born in early 2020. So with COVID, they're like, we can't take it out yet, but they did push up my surgery, and I went through the proctocolectomy alone because you couldn't have anyone at the hospital. And that obviously solved all of my problems with the diversion colitis. But what you described is actually called diversion proctitis, just in the end rectum.
Gosh, I am learning so much today. This is fascinating, but also like, oh God, I'm so sorry.
Well,
a lot.
I'm grateful. I'm grateful to be on the other end of it.
Yes, I would imagine. So I'm going to shift us a little bit away from personal story, but feel free to go back and forth if you want to come back to that one. But I'm going to shift you over to your professional side. So were you a dietitian prior to you developing this? When did your interest in dietetics and also like working with people with ostomies start?
Yes, I'd love to share that. So I was a dietitian before my GI symptoms even started. Been a dietitian for now almost 8 years. And my symptoms actually started with my first clinical job. I was working in a pediatric ICU in trauma down here in South Florida, one of the biggest safety net hospitals. And my specialty was burn victims. It was a very high stress environment. It was very intense. And I'm not surprised that that is when GI symptoms would take off, but that is when they started. And I didn't really know what specialty I wanted to have as a dietitian, but I loved pediatrics. And I think it's because pediatric is more, I don't know, it's more formal. It's like you either do it or you don't. You're not dealing with people's opinions, because parents will do anything for their kids. So whatever you tell them, they're going to do it. You're not really fighting back with someone who's like, well, I don't really want to exercise, or, like that is not the kind of nutrition I like dealing with. Because I don't want to have to convince a grown adult to take care of themselves. So I really did love pediatrics. I loved that environment, but that's when my GI symptoms started. And then I'm from South Florida. That's where I was working. I moved to Canada with my husband. He's from Toronto. And we're like, let's give this a shot. They say healthcare is free over there. Turns out if you have any kind of chronic health condition, especially without a diagnosis, not good for an American who is used to immediate services, because I could not get healthcare for the life of me. So at that time, I was working with the autoimmune population. I was working with a group of dietitians out of Boston, because that's where I went to school, and I could work virtually. And I didn't at that time have a license in Canada. And then I became dually licensed, but my symptoms got bad enough that we decided to come back to the States. And that's actually what happened. Was I woke up one morning and I told my husband, I'm flying to South Florida and I'm going to find me a doctor that can help me. And no joke, within 4 weeks later, I was waking up with my ostomy. And I didn't know that was going to happen. Like I said, wasn't on my radar. And I didn't even know that one of the best colorectal surgeons in the country, actually in the world, he trains surgeons all over the world, was in my own backyard in South Florida. And I was so lucky because this guy took a huge chance on me. I don't know many surgeons who say, I'm going to make an ostomy. That's going to be the diagnostic tool. Getting the diversion colitis, well, it was terrible. Generally, not everyone who is diverted gets diverting colitis. But if you do, there's a great chance that you had an underlying IBD diagnosis, whether you were diagnosed or not. So that for me was kind of like, okay, maybe most likely I had some form of ulcerative colitis, but I will never know. My colon is out in the universe somewhere. So I won't know, but I will say that is interesting for me in my health journey. I don't know. It always hangs kind of in the back of my mind. Yeah. But so to answer your question, which is yes, I was a dietitian. Now, how did I started to work with this population? Well, when I got my surgery after being sick for so many years, I needed to take a break for my own, mental health. I really needed to distance myself because I was a patient for so long, consuming so much healthcare. I needed to just step back. But then I got spontaneously pregnant with my son, and then I had another one 18 months later. My two boys are 18 months apart, and they're both miracle babies. My second one was through IVF, and they're amazing. Just thinking about them makes me, I get overwhelmed with emotion because I feel so grateful. But I really didn't have space within all those years. I ended up having a C-section with my second. Then I had another revision on my ostomy due to the development of scar tissue to work. And so I didn't work as a dietitian. I actually had like one small job in between stapling papers for my husband's business. And I always knew, even though I kept telling myself, no, distance yourself from working with patients, again, protect myself really from going back into healthcare, especially since I was so used to the ICU environment. I don't feel like I chose this specialty. It doesn't even feel like a specialty to me. It feels like it chose me. I have no choice. I have to do this because I live it day in and day out. It's a little bit different than just, being a dietitian and saying, okay, this year I'm going to be a renal dietitian, or, this year I want to split my focus in GI or whatever it is, or transplant. I do this every single day. And aside from that, there is an extreme need for someone to focus in this area. And I think that is what just kept screaming at me in the back of my head. Like, how could I not do this? I feel like it is just a disservice if I didn't. And I knew that day one, waking up with my ostomy and having this young dietitian come in and throw papers at me and say, don't eat fiber, good luck with your life. And that was the moment. I was like, I can't, no, it was just, I couldn't. There's really no words for that. And that's how I decided to. And so after time and, my youngest starting preschool for a little bit of time, he's in school half day, I felt like I had the space to be able to work with other people, to be able to take on that mental burden, because it is when you work with clients and you have to hear their stories and you resonate so much with them. It reminds you of your own experiences. I felt ready, and it was the right time, and I love it so much. But like I said, it really doesn't feel like work.
First of all, thank you for taking on the burden. It is so important that you, as a person living with an ostomy, can provide care for people who are also living with ostomies because you live it. So on behalf of every one of us who have lived with ostomies or are currently living with ostomies, thank you so much. It's a conversation that Stacey Collins, who's been on the show a lot, have had about IBD patients who have had surgery. Having a dietitian who has had the surgery, gone through the J-pouch surgery, who understands what trying to nourish your body through that process or be malnourished going into that surgery process and trying to prepare yourself for it having a dietitian walk in and throw the papers on you, like, here you go, prep for surgery or whatever. Here you go. Now go post-op. Like, just having someone like you who's living it, and you've had to troubleshoot. You've had to like see the output. You've had to measure the output. You've had to do all of those things. And unfortunately for yourself and fortunately for us, you've had to live it, and you have the knowledge and the expertise to be able to walk us through it too. So we're very grateful that you've decided to share that with us all. Thank you.
Like you said, it's not only have I walked it, but I will continue because I can't go back. And that's why I feel like I'm so invested into this specialty, because for myself, I want to know how the research applies to our population. Mm-hmm. You bring up this great point of the J pouch, and Stacy, I've spoken with Stacy, and I feel like every dietitian in this space kind of has their niche based on their own personal story. Mm-hmm. I know she has shared on your podcast before this interest in the J pouch. Each one of these segments of, this trajectory of having IBD, you have IBD with no surgical intervention. You have this J pouch, which means multiple surgeries before and after, and then maybe an end ileostomy. Each one of the nutritional implications are so different. The surgical trajectory, there's no research. There's so little research. So most of the ways that I work with my client population is basically just educating them and saying there is no research. So don't listen to A, B, and C because we don't know. And if this, things like that, we're just blatantly being transparent and saying we don't know. And this brings up the topic of this gap between the provider and the patient, and not providing a realistic view of what their life is going to be afterwards in terms of diet and nutrition. I cannot tell you how many times, I can tell you every single time I talk to a client, I am told the same thing, which is the same thing I was told when I woke up from surgery and I asked, what can I eat? You can eat whatever you want. I am so tired.
I heard that too. When I had my ostomy, I heard that too. Yes.
Yeah, I'm going to actually write a book one day that says you can eat whatever you want, not. Pranks on you, because this really gives people this unrealistic expectation. It's all about expectations when it comes to patients who are not in healthcare. Like, I was very lucky that I had this background, but most people do not. And then they really hang on the words of their providers. And then they come in with this expectation that they could have their life back in this one realm of diet and nutrition, which we all know food plays such an important role culturally and socially and happiness and all the things. And then there's such a letdown is what I find. And the clients come to me and they're just like, but they told me I could. Why can't I? And that really shouldn't even be a question I should be answering. As soon as that surgery is done, the surgeon kind of feels like they've done their job. Goodbye. Right? Especially for ostomates who don't have IBD and are not getting ongoing care. Because when you have IBD, especially Crohn's, you're kind of still being looked after, especially by your GI. If you have an ostomy for any other reason, you're pretty much discharged. And so there is no long-term care for anything preventatively with the ostomy. The ostomy itself has so many nutrition implications. I'm kind of getting off topic, but my point here was being that the surgeon could just change that statement and say, you are like everyone else in the world. With an ostomy or not, you likely can't just eat whatever you want. That one statement could really change everything for a person. I know, and it may not sound as like positive, but it's people don't want to just be told something that's not going to actually happen. They want to hear the truth.
Yeah, you have to manage expectations. You have to manage people's expectations. You can't just send them home from the hospital being like, you just eat whatever you want. Woo, party! Party in my belly.
Especially in this population who's been restricting food for how long, has been suffering from symptoms and disease and just, I don't know the statistics of how many have disordered eating patterns from restricting. And then they're like, it almost sounds reckless, honestly, for a surgeon to say that. My surgeon specifically told me that go ahead. After he said, you can eat anything I wanted, he said, go ahead, just have a sandwich. And it's become this joke between my husband and my mom, who was in the room at the time. And anytime I'm like, I'm hungry, what should I eat? They go, just have a sandwich. Like, they quote him because it was so just out of this world for him to say this. It turned out that I couldn't eat for a month after my surgery because I just couldn't. And so it really hangs in my mind forever. At least I can laugh about it, right?
Yes. We have to be able to laugh, but I actually love that. I'm going to start saying that. Go ahead. Just have a sandwich.
Yeah. Have a sandwich. It will solve all the problems.
Yes. Yes. So,
okay, so I am very curious about this because obviously we have had some dietitians on the show that have had experience working with people with J pouches, but IBD in general. So I'm curious, how do you educate somebody living with an ostomy on what is the right sort of course to take? Obviously, understanding that everybody is different, blah, blah, blah. Is there some general information and education you provide to people with ostomies about working with a dietitian and sort of how they might benefit from changes in how they're eating or their diet? Is there some generalities you can share? I realize, again, it's going to be largely dependent on the person.
It is, but there are many generalities, which is why I think that a surgeon and even a GI can relay a lot of this information, especially the dietitians who they often refer their patients to, because there are common themes. So the issue here is this managing this expectation and basically educating the patient, the workings of the colon now that they no longer have one, what it means to them as far as foods that are higher in fiber, fruits, vegetables, whole grains, all these foods that they tell patients after ostomy surgery, okay, don't eat these for, generally they say 6 weeks. Okay. They put them on what's called a low residue diet. And then they give them zero guidance about reintroducing them. But if you don't have a colon, right? Let's say we're talking solely about the ileostomy population. For some people, they cannot reintroduce these successfully for a very long time. The bowel goes through a process of bowel adaptation, which usually takes about 4 to 6 weeks to even start. This is why doctors say don't even start including higher residue foods until that 6-week mark. But it can take years before a patient can successfully eat a 1/4 cup of broccoli or a tablespoon of broccoli. And this is because the large intestine is responsible for breaking down fiber. The reason it's so different in the IBD population versus the ostomy population, aside from the fact that they don't have a colon, is that the ostomy population is now managing an ostomy, which is all about quality of life. This means that day in and day out, a person is waking up and constantly thinking about their output, the leaks, the blockages, the partial obstructions, how thick their output is, how thin they want it to be, where they're going that day, how many days they have left on that bag. Can they risk eating a piece of broccoli that might knock it off and cause them a leak at work? These are the things that are not addressed at all. This is all about quality of life living with an ostomy. And I find that if you're a dietitian who has IBD experience, then you know more about it. If you are a dietitian who has IBD experience or IBD themselves and then has had an ostomy, you get it even more. I think this is what dietitians can provide, who have this personal experience, can provide for this population, is this just day-to-day living experience. It's not even really talking about the nutrition. It's more managing the ostomy itself as it relates to food and nutrition. Does that make sense?
It does. So what I'm hearing you saying is that in general, don't listen to the advice of just go ahead and eat your sandwich. It is, okay, ensure that you're not eating too many high fiber foods and slowly introducing them after at least 6 weeks.
Oh, yes. If I had to generalize about the reintroduction process, it's going to look different for everyone. There are people with ileostomies who say they can eat everything. I actually think those people who come out there and promote that kind of do a disservice because most people don't feel that way. And I also hear that a lot. How come, I was told I can eat anything I want, and then I hear from others I can. And that's just a little bit about, distancing yourself from maybe some of these social media platforms, and they can be helpful, but they could also be hurtful. But yeah, in general, reintroductions take time, and it's going to be different for every single person. And the way your output affects your life is also going to be different. Some people eat foods to manage their output. Some people eat foods and don't care that they have 3 leaks or they have to change their bag every day. Like the priorities are different and different for everyone. I think that is the hardest piece for providers to understand, because obviously most providers who are making stomas don't have ostomies themselves.
I want to reiterate something that you said. It can take a long time. Your body is relearning how to do something. So whether you have a permanent ostomy or a temporary ostomy where you're going to be reconnected, whether that's through what I had for 20 years, which was an ileal rectal anastomosis, or you have a J pouch, which is what I have now, or whatever that looks like, whatever kind of new plumbing you have in there, your intestines are learning how to work again. And so that could take 6 months, that could take 12 months, that could take 24 months. It takes however long it takes. And so you have to give your body time for that to happen. And as much as we want it to take 6 months instead of 24 months, we can't rush that process. And I would jump on the bandwagon of slowly introducing the foods that you love. Like Amalia said, just if there's something that you want to eat again, just do a small amount and do it slowly and see how it works for you. If it is broccoli, just do it slowly. Cook the crap out of it. Try to make it to where it's more tolerable. Don't eat it raw.
I think it should also be okay to explain to an individual that they may never be able to eat broccoli again.
Yes.
I think that these conversations, this transparency needs to happen, because I think that's, again, going back to managing the expectations, everything you just said about this bowel adaptation. Did you have that conversation when you had your temporary ileostomy? Did anyone say, this takes 24? Yeah. Right.
No, when 20 years ago, I figured that out on my own. So I knew this time around when I had surgery, you know what? I really can't eat broccoli. I still can't eat broccoli, and I'm 2 years out. If I want broccoli, I just have like broccoli shavings. It's just like the tree tops, the leaves of the trees on the tops of the broccoli is what I have. I don't have big pieces of broccoli now that I think about it, but I can eat these strawberries, which I haven't been able to eat for 20 years. So I'm living my life. But I mean, it's different. You have to manage everybody's expectations. I may never be able to eat broccoli again now that you said that. I might not.
And you remind me of something that I often tell my clients, which is treat fruits and vegetables and high fiber foods kind of like this idea of dessert. Let it be like the last thing on your mind, and remember where you came from in this journey. An ostomy isn't positive for everyone. I do want to state that, because I do get that feedback sometimes that they're tired of always hearing the ostomy saved my life. I'm so grateful, having that just overly positive, appreciative value for the ostomy. However, a lot of people do. And so I say, remember where you came from and where you are, and that where is this broccoli or corn, where is that on your priorities after surviving all of that? And if you have to have it and you want to trial it, give it that respect. Make it like an event. Sit down with the one broccoli floret you're going to try. Have a glass of juice with it or whatever, and your favorite show. This is really what I tell people, like, celebrate it. I know it sounds silly, but this is how I think about those things.
No, that is the truth.
That's not
It is exciting.
So the other thing I'm wondering is, you mentioned, that you always have electrolytes. Are there other things that folks with ostomy should sort of know or understand that now you are living with an ostomy? Here are the sort of triggers, things for you to look for, or things that perhaps you might want to consider adding automatically to your diet?
Yes. Well, I'm glad you brought up this topic. I'm very passionate about kidney health. And maybe you're thinking, what are you talking about? Because I don't think this is the first topic that comes to mind when people talk about ostomies, but this really brings up the topic of ongoing care post having an ostomy, for the ostomy itself, not for the condition you have, whether that was endometriosis or, cancer, colon cancer, or paraplegia. Like, there's so many reasons why someone gets an ostomy. I'm talking about, what about the ostomy changes the other organs in your body and how they function. And hydration, while it's always emphasized within ostomy, no one really gives clear guidelines and says, are you peeing enough? Because if you're not, you're at a higher risk of kidney stones. As soon as you have acute kidney injury, you're at a higher risk of kidney disease. And this is just not spoken about your long-term health. Now that I have my ostomy, I got my ostomy, 5 years ago? I'm 34. Okay, I'm not going to do the math here because it's not good. But I'm relatively young. I've got a lot of years ahead. And if I don't keep on top of some of these things that are chronic with just the ostomy, remember, I don't even have a diagnosis. So I don't have a chronic condition. I can still be in a lot of trouble. So yes, hydration needs to be taken more seriously than just telling an individual after they leave the hospital, drink enough water and propel. Like that is not an okay discharge paperwork to give someone. You need ongoing follow-ups. They can actually see how you're doing, your creatinine levels, and making sure you're not developing stones is so common amongst the ostomy population. So yeah, between the two, fiber and hydration, those are probably the two most important ongoing, I would say, health battles and considerations. But really, really, hydration is probably the number one most important thing for long-term care.
If that's the case, is there I'm thinking of like dieting and calories, right? It was like, okay, you want to lose weight, eat less calories. If you want to stay hydrated, is there like a calculation that you yourself can do to say like, here's enough hydration? Like, because like you said, if it's like, how much am I peeing? But like, how much should I be peeing? Like, I probably am not peeing enough now. You've got me super worried.
I know. I also, as I said it out loud, I thought to myself, what did my pee look like today? Which I ask myself so many times a day. I always say that anyone with an ostomy, like literally has an ongoing list of 1,000 questions in their heads about their output, their bag, and now I can add on to it their pee. But yes, the mental burden is high, but I think it is for anyone with chronic health issues. 1,200 milliliters is kind of a baseline. That's, everyone has different health conditions. So if they've got already kidney issues, it's going to fluctuate between how much sodium they can take and whatever. But 1,200 milliliters is how much you should be peeing a day. It shouldn't be yellow. And there is a recommendation, a rough guideline of about 2.5 liters. And this is for an ileostomy specifically, because if you still have parts of your colon, you're going to be absorbing more water, and these numbers are going to fluctuate. And you really need to work with someone to go through your symptoms. However, by the time I'm not an inpatient dietitian. These are kind of the things that I think should be the first line of defense when someone leaves the hospital, with the idea in mind that they can keep, we call it like a toilet hat on your toilet. You can keep one in the closet for those times you really aren't feeling well, to kind of check in on yourself. But no one does this. I think I'm invested because I'm in healthcare and I'm very passionate about it, but it's an extra burden. People don't want to do it. But so this idea of drinking about maybe 2.5 liters if you have an ostomy is easier to understand than collecting your urine and seeing. I have mentioned it to clients who I think are chronically dehydrated and are resistant to accepting any electrolyte supplements. That's a big barrier to entry to those supplements. Taste aversion, cost, they're expensive. To be told you have to rely on these for the rest of your life. But I have asked people to measure their urine and see, just to give them an idea. I think knowledge is power. Education is power. I think I provide more education than I do with clear-cut goals, do A, B, and C, because like I said at the beginning of this conversation, I'm not in a position to convince people. But if people are already coming to me, likely they want to take initiative and put these things into practice. So I think that is kind of where I fall as far as a dietitian, is the educating piece. And I do think there's room in the future, maybe when I'm not so much on the patient side and patient advocacy side, which is very much where I am now since I'm outpatient and working virtually, to maybe one day work with providers or other dietitians sharing this knowledge and education. I would like to do that in the future.
I mean, it sounds super necessary. It sounds like it would be really great for you to like kind of come up with a, like you said, sort of generality guide for people leaving the hospital with an ostomy, number one. And then, okay, now your 6-week post, let's talk a little bit further. Here's your crash course. And then now what's next? I think that would be really great.
Yeah, I agree.
I'm already working on the like outline for you in my head. Because honestly, I mean, like it sounds like it's just super overdue for everybody to have a little bit more information and perhaps, like you said, a little bit more reality-based information than just go ahead and run out and eat a sandwich and then pay for it later, like pay for it big time later. So, wow. Amalia, you gave some really great information about like fiber and understanding how your guidelines around fiber might change after you have an ostomy, but are there other things that patients should consider?
Yeah, so there are other, recommendations for the IBD population and for individuals in the regular population that don't have IBD that can be preventative of developing IBD. Some of those recommendations, like lower saturated fat, trans fat, palm oil, eating less processed foods, what they call ultra processed foods. While these recommendations are awesome, I love them for general health. When you think of an ostomate who's coming out of surgery and told to no longer eat high residue foods, what kind of foods can we think about they're probably relying on? They're relying on ultra processed foods, generally crackers and pretzels and chips. And I was there. I remember I ate so many Cheez-Its after surgery. And I think from just a practicality that is okay. And that's fine, right? But now you're talking about this long-term health. And this is probably more relative to the Crohn's population, because even though they've had a colectomy, they still have active disease in their small intestine. So now they're being told, okay, the IBD recommendation guideline is saying don't eat A, B, and C foods, but these are my safe foods. This is what I can eat that won't cause a blockage. And because I can't have all these high fiber foods, I'm hungry, which means I'm eating foods higher in fat and saturated fat and palm oil, all the things that they're saying are preventative and can possibly, naturally treat their disease doesn't really apply. And there's just, again, you have to kind of work with the client to see how they can transition out of some of these safe foods to kind of stay within those guidelines. But again, some of them just simply don't apply. I've asked a few doctors about this, and they said that the research, there's very little research, and most of it is about preventing pouchitis if you have a J pouch. But they've told me that anecdotally, these guidelines, IBD guidelines for the population that have not had surgical interventions, don't hold up. And these individuals who have J pouches just need to treat it with the right medications because there isn't enough research. So those are just some of the guidelines, and we spoke about fiber before that don't always match up in the surgical IBD population.
And I guess that's why it's so important to work with a dietitian, because they can help you discern maybe how you make some substitutions or how you add some things in that will help you add calories to make you feel fuller and not so, hangry. And then you're immediately reaching for the Cheez-Its, which do sound amazing.
Or does it even matter?
Or does it matter?
Yeah. Can that be a part of their diet and be totally fine and actually very beneficial for their hydration, because now they've thickened their output and we prioritize hydration, right, above everything else. How do these foods actually aid the ostomy population?
Yeah.
Which is something that Michelle talked about with the J pouch population with hydration for J pouches, eating before drinking so that it does help to absorb so that you can hydrate. It's easier for you to maintain hydration.
Yeah, that's true. I forgot about that. So interesting. I would love to know, what was the recipe that you put the champagne in?
So this is going to be ironic because you all know now I'm a dietitian. That has been very clear. But I bake on the side. I have a small little bakery business, and it's for fun. It's for close friends and family members, whatever. The champagne went into a champagne buttercream for a strawberry vanilla cupcake that somebody ordered.
Amazing.
Yeah, and I couldn't waste the rest of the bottle. So
no, you could not. Oh, I love that. That sounds so amazing. And I love buttercream. Big fan of buttercream. Love champagne.
I was about to say, you're a big fan of champagne.
Yeah. Everything about this cupcake sounds like something I would adore, except for the gluten, unfortunately, for me. So that I just need to figure out how to make a gluten-free version of that, and I'm in.
Well, come on over and I will make it for you. Gluten-free and everything. But it will have real butter in it because I can't cheat that way.
Yeah, no, when I also love to bake. It's just a hobby for me and not a business, nor I think will it probably ever be. But when I bake, I use like Irish straight cream, full salt butter. So it always is good.
Yeah, it has to be it has to be. And obviously, as soon as you tell someone you bake and you're a dietitian, and they're like, oh, so you make everything healthy and substituted. And then I go, nope. I told you that I'm ironic.
No.
And I mean,
No.
it's not like, I think people equate dietitians with dieting, and that's not what's happening here. It's not about people losing weight, or like, yes, it could be them reducing their cholesterol and then maybe not the full fat butter. But, you know, I feel like there's this like myth that if you're working with a dietitian, you're trying to lose weight, when it's so much more for so many people about how do you get back to the life that you want? How do you get, like you said, that quality of life back?
Yeah, I'm a big proponent for the quality of life piece. And I think that resonates with the IBD population who had such poor quality of life for so many years before they got their ostomy.
For sure.
On your fun facts, one of the things that you put was you have your pilot's license?
Yes.
When did you get your pilot's license? Please tell me about this.
So I did my undergrad I got my degree in dietetics in a DPD program, a didactic program in dietetics. And I also did my requirements for physiotherapy because I wasn't sure what I wanted to do. And when I graduated, I've always been pretty into academics. I was really tired. And I said, I don't want to do anything. So I ended up backpacking and doing a bunch of dangerous things I can't even imagine doing now that I have children. And one of the things that has always been on my bucket list is to get my pilot's license. So, you know, given all the nausea I had experienced in my GI history, I was like, I'm not going to like this. I never liked roller coasters. I'm going to do a discovery flight is what they call it. They take you up in the air for 30 minutes. Anyone can do it. It's really fun and I'm going to hate it. But if I don't see if I hate it, like it's always going to be in my mind. And I did not hate it. I actually loved it so much. And I will never forget on that flight that he said, open the window and put your hand outside. And we were flying through clouds and I put my hand outside and all I felt was water. It was this incredible experience because obviously they never let me do that as I was training. That would be irresponsible. But it was awesome. And that was kind of that. And I spent maybe it was 4 months getting my private pilot's license, which by the way is nothing. Like your private pilot's license is basically a license to learn, like it to then become a pilot. And as soon as you even learn how a plane is flown, you never want to get into another plane or let anyone fly you because it's so terrifying. My now husband, but he was my boyfriend at the time, said that every time I would go to my lessons, he would turn on the radio, like expecting like to make sure that I wasn't one of those like crop dusters that fell, because that's what happens to these little planes. So that's that story.
Gosh.
I got my private pilots. I do still really want to learn how to land a plane in the water. One of these small planes, you know, like the planes that like go up to a cottage. Mm-hmm. That's still on my bucket list, but I don't know. And when I think about all the things, I don't know if I can do it.
That's so awesome.
It's the best thing I ever did. Being in the air is the most freeing space. I don't know. I think some people are water people. They like to dive and be in that kind of space. That to me sounds suffocating. But to be in the air is the most free I feel like I've ever felt in my entire life.
Awesome. My bucket list, I'm scuba diving as soon as I get cleared from the pulmonologist.
Yeah.
I'm scuba diving. Yes.
See, that to me sounds terrifying to me, which I actually feel like I need to overcome. A lot of my family members they scuba dive. My nephew, I think he's 12. He's already certified. He's done all his training in a pool and he's gone by himself. However, my son is obsessed with animal life and sea life. This takes over his entire brain 90% of the day. And I don't want to deny this for him, especially living in South Florida. So I feel like it's inevitable. I'm going to have to learn how to dive. And normally I would throw these things on my husband, but he's a type 1 diabetic, so he can't dive. So it's going to be left to mama to do.
Looks like you're diving.
Yeah. Looks like I'm diving.
Looks like you're diving. Thank you so, so much for coming on the show, for being our guest, for sharing with us your expertise and your wild experience. I I still can't even get over it. But it's time for me to ask you the last question. I guess I can ask you both. What is the one thing you want the IBD patient community to know? And what is the one thing you want the IBD professional community to know?
Ooh, okay. So the one thing I want the IBD patient population to know is that even within the IBD population, everyone's story is unique and patients need to advocate for their individual stories. A lot of times their IBD diagnosis comes along with other conditions. And I kind of feel like the IBD is becoming a little bit of a hot topic. And all of these generalizations that are made about IBD can put people down that don't feel like they fit in, especially on social media, which is where a lot of people look to for comfort and advice and support. And I want the IBD population to really advocate for the unique part of their stories and don't let those fall in the background. And as far as what I want the IBD provider population to know is, please come and ask me questions if you've got them. I am going to answer them for you. I don't care how much time you take from me. I am so passionate about getting more providers to spread this knowledge. And, maybe one day there'll be a specialty for dietitians that is they took a course in ostomy health or IBD. Already there's a lot more for the IBD, but for ostomy and IBD, there's less. And I hope that there'll be more of that in the future.
That's fantastic. And yes, that would be it would be amazing if we were to have a specialty for IBD dietitians, but also dietitians who know specifically about working with people with ostomies. I think that's so necessary. Thank you so very much for sharing your story with us and for sharing your professional knowledge with us as well. I mean, this has been so interesting and enlightening. And I know some folks are definitely going to want to get in touch with you. So thank you for doing that. Thank you, everyone else, for joining us for our bowel moments. And cheers, guys.
Cheers, everybody.
Cheers. Hi, this is Amalia. And if you enjoyed this episode, please rate, review, and share it with a friend.